There are over 99 different ways a goblin speaks, but only one noise as generic as this one.
Hey gang, just to let you know, you can now use the promo code MTGMudsta, all caps, at flipsidegaming.com and originalmagicart.store. Using the code gets you 10% off orders $10 or more, and you get to help out the channel at the same time. I also want to let you know that Flipside Gaming will be giving away a box of War of the Sparks. From April 1st through May 6th, any order that's over $10 or more will get you entered to win. One entry per person, so good luck and have fun. Welcome back, my generic goblin gang. Today's game was filmed at Gamerz Cafe in Montreal, Quebec. Today, Armin is playing his Terrain Tallying Tatyova deck, and he keeps a Polluted Delta, a Tranquil Thicket, a Verdant Catacomb, a Burgeoning, Kadama's Reach, and Uyo Silent Prophet. Roxy is playing her giant green Ghalta deck with 2 forests in hand, a Noxious Revival, Grothama the All-Devouring, Nature's Lore, and a Caustic Caterpillar. Andrew, who's new to the channel, is playing the tricky and tenacious Taigam, keeping Merfolk Trickster, Imprisoned in the Moon, 2 islands, a Plains, Whisper Silk Cloak, and Chains of Vapor. Last but not least, we have Pat, who I don't have a fun thing to say about, but he's playing Unesh, and it's Sphinx Tribal. He's keeping a Reliquary Tower, 2 islands, Snapcaster Mage, Phantasmal Image, Sapphire Medallion, and a Curator of Mysteries. Armin wins the die roll and starts us off. Armin draws and plays a forest, casting a turn 1 Burgeoning and passing. Pat plays an island, and Armin gets to play a tapped Tranquil Thicket. Andrew plays a tapped Hollowed Fountain, and Armin gets to drop a Verdant Catacomb. Roxy plays a forest, and she casts a Llanowar Elves. At the end of her turn, Armin cracks the Catacombs and goes to find a breeding pool, losing 1 life. Armin draws, and he casts Kadama's Reach. He finds an island for the field and 1 for hand, and he passes to Pat. Pat plays an island, and Armin drops an island from hand as well. Pat then casts a Sapphire Medallion, passing. Andrew plays an island, and jealous of all the ramp and reduction, casts his Thought Vessel before passing. Roxy plays a forest, and casts Nature's Lore to find another forest. She then casts a Caustic Caterpillar, and passes. Armin draws, and casts Tatyova. He plays a Polluted Delta, gaining 1 life, and drawing a card as it enters. He then passes to Pat. Pat casts a Phantasmal Image in his main phase, who comes in as a copy of Tatyova. He plays a Reliquary Tower, which lets Armin play a Misty Rainforest, and both of them gain 1 life and draw 1 card. Andrew plays an island, and with the Burgeoning trigger on the stack, Pat uses Reality Shift to exile Tatyova. With the spell targeting his commander, Armin cracks both of his fetches, taking 2 to go and find 2 lands. He grabs a forest and an island, drawing 2 and gaining 2 life. Armin then exiles Tatyova, and manifests the top card before putting an Ouroboros Palace in the Clouds into play, but doesn't gain his life or draw. Andrew then plays a Whisper Silk Cloak, and he passes to Roxy. Roxy uses her Caustic Caterpillar to blow up Armin's Burgeoning, but I think we can all agree that Armin's gotten some great value out of it so far already. With nothing else, she then passes. Armin pays 6 in his main phase to cast an Uyo, and he plays a forest. He then passes to Pat. Pat draws and plays an Ancient Tomb, gaining 1 and drawing a card from the clone Tatyova. He then loses 2 life from the tomb to help cast Unesh, and has Armin decide the mini-factor fiction as the Sphinx enters. Pat takes the pile with the Sphinxes over the Walk the Eons and passes. Andrew draws and plays a Plains. We see Taigam hit the field, and he passes to Roxy. Roxy plays a forest and pays 5 to cast Grothama All-Devouring. With the legendary on the stack, Armin uses a Crossing Grip to blow up Pat's Sapphire Medallion. Her legendary then resolves, and Roxy passes. Armin casts a Ramunap Excavator in his main phase, and then drops a Zuza Lost But Seeking. He replays the Delta, Rainforest, and Catacombs from his graveyard before passing to Pat. Pat draws, and he plays a Nykthos' land for turn, gaining 1 life and drawing a card. He then casts a Curator of Mysteries for only 2 blue. He has Armin make the piles again, and takes the land and Caged Sun over the 2 mana rocks. Pat then loses 2 more life to use the Ancient Tomb, and has enough mana to cast Caged Sun, naming blue before passing. Andrew untaps and plays a Terramorphic Expanse as his land for turn. He casts an Imprisoned in the Moon, and he targets Armin's Uyo. The spell resolves, and he cracks its expanse while passing a Roxy. Roxy plays a forest and has enough power on the board to only pay 2 for Ghalta. She then casts a Soul's Majesty, but is stopped by a timely remand from Andrew. Roxy then moves to combat, and Ghalta swings at Andrew, who just takes the hit for 10. Meanwhile, Armin cracks his 3 fetches to find 3 basics and lose 3 life at the end of Roxy's turn. Armin draws and recasts Tatyova. He then drops a Rampaging Baloth, and plays his 3 fetch lands from the yard, gaining 1 life and drawing 1 card, and gaining a beast token each time. Sadly, Armin didn't come prepared, so he doesn't have the right tokens, and we settle for some angels. Pat plays an island, and draws and gains 1 life. He then pays 2 for a Merchant's Scroll, and goes to find a spell. He reveals a Cyclonic Rift, and he moves to combat. Pat swings the Curator and Unesh at Armin for 8, who takes the hit. Andrew plays an island for his turn, and he enchants Taigam with Steel of the Godhead. He swings it at Roxy for 5 commander damage, and he gains 5 life. With Taigam having attacked, Andrew's spells now have rebound, and he casts Swords to Plowshares targeting the Excavator. In response, Armin cracks a fetch and loses 1 to find a land. He grabs an island, gaining 1 life and drawing a card and a token. He does this 2 more times, with his last fetch finding a tropical island. He's digging for a counterspell, but he can't find one, so the Excavator is exiled, and Armin gains 2 life. Roxy plays Soul's Majesty again, and with Armin gaining priority, he uses Beast Within to blow up past Nykthos. Pat in turn activates the land, and takes 2 to help overload the Cyclonic Rift. This all but resets the board, except for Pat's side. And not drawing any cards, Roxy recasts her Llanowar Elves before passing turn. Armin rebuilds his board on his turn, casting Tatyova, then a Rampaging Baloths, and then Azusa. He plays a land, gaining 1 life, 1 token, and drawing 1 card. He then plays another basic, doing the same. We then move to his end of turn, and Armin has to discard down to 7 before he passes to Pat. Pat plays a Misty Rainforest of his own, gaining 1 life and drawing 1 as it enters. He then loses 1, but gains it back and draws 1 as he cracks it to find a basic. Pat then loses 2 life to tap his Ancient Tome, and he casts an Alhamret High Arbiter. Armin casts Crop Rotation with the Enter the Battlefield trigger on the stack, sacrificing a land and grabbing a Flooded Grove. This gives him 1 life, 1 token, and 1 card as it enters. Pat then gets to see the hands, and he names Capsize. He then resolves his Unesh trigger and has Armin make the piles once more. Pat takes the pile with #SadSolemn before passing turn. Andrew's swords rebound on his upkeep, and he has to make a decision. Pat and Armin are both in strong positions, and Andrew decides to target Uyo. Armin activates Uyo in response, bouncing 2 of his lands to his hand, and he copies the instant. He exiles Alhamret, and Pat gains 5 while Armin gains 4. Andrew then draws, and he plays a Plains. He recasts Thought Vessel, and then uses Imprisoned in the Moon on Tatyova. With nothing else, he passes to Roxy. Roxy casts an Elvish Mystic, and then a Ghalta, which gives her enough power to cast Ghalta for only 2 green again. At the end of her turn, Armin casts a Worldly Tutor to go and find a creature. He finds and puts a Royal Elemental on top of his library. Armin draws the Elemental for turn, and he casts Green Sun Zenith in his main phase where X is 3. He goes and grabs Reclamation Sage, and he blows up Imprisoned in the Moon. Armin then moves to cast Royal Elemental, but Pat is ready with an Arcane Denial. Armin now knows who he wants to attack, and he sends his 3 beasts at Pat and the Rampaging Baloth at Andrew. They each take the hit, and Armin replays his Oboro, which he'd bounced back to hand earlier. He gains 1 life, draws a card, and gains a token. Armin then replays the Flooded Grove he bounced back to his hand with Uyo, and he gains the same as before. We then see a Multani from Armin's hand, and Armin quickly counts up his lands. He then plays his 3rd land for turn, Strip Mine, gaining all of the stuff that he got before, and uses the Strip Mine to nuke Pat's Ancient Tomb. Pat draws, and he plays an island, gaining 1 life and drawing 1. He then casts Urgolem's Eye, and he passes to Andrew. Andrew is hoping to draw a board wipe, and he plays an island for his land for turn. He sadly doesn't get there though, as he recasts Taigam and then reenchants it with Steel before passing. At the end of turn, Roxy pays 2 life to cast Noxious Revival for no mana, and she puts Soul's Majesty on top of her library. Roxy draws the Soul's Majesty, and after casting it for a 3rd time this game, finally gets to draw her 12. She plays a Forest, and then pays 4 to cast Greater Good. She then passes to Armin. Armin plays a Wooded Foothills, or should I say a Footed Woodhills, gaining 1 life and a token and a card. He moves straight to combat afterwards, swinging his beasts and Multani at Pat. Before moving to blockers, Pat flashes in Snapcaster Mage and flashes back Reality Shift. Armin activates his Wooded Foothills with a spell in the stack, gaining 1 of everything again after finding a forest. He then casts a Growth Spiral, drawing a card, and puts Scalding Tarn into play. He does his thing again, gaining 1 life, etc, etc. And he then cracks the Tarn, losing another life to find an island, and gains everything again. He's looking for a counter, but can't find one, so he has to settle for a bought-back Capsize to bounce Multani back to his hand. Pat then blocks what he can, and drops to 16. In Armin's second main phase, he casts Crucible of Worlds, and plays a Strip Mine from the graveyard to kill Pat's Reliquary Tower. Armin then casts a Soul Ring, and he moves to discard before passing. Pat plays an island and gains 1 life and draws another card. He asks to check out some graveyards, and he goes around the table. Pat then casts a Bribery and targets Armin. He goes through Armin's library, and he grabs an Avenger of Zendikar. It comes in, and it grants him 6 plant tokens, which is a decent chunk of blockers. Pat then passes. Andrew plays a Reliquary Tower, and the land flood is real, before he passes turn. At the end of turn, Roxy sacrifices Grathama to Greater Good, drawing 10 and discarding 3. Roxy draws for turn and plays a Nykthos. She counts up her mana, and then pays 3 to cast Elvish Archdruid. We then see Survival of the Fittest hit the field, and she pays 1 to discard a creature card and goes to find one. She puts a Surak the Hunt Caller to hand, before activating her Nykthos. She gains 9 green mana, and uses it to help cast Surak, an Arbor Elf, drag a Tree Speaker, and then she casts a Wood Elves. She goes and grabs a forest before moving to combat. In her combat step, Roxy puts Surak's haste trigger on her Archdruid, and moves to her second main phase. She taps the Archdruid for 6 green, and uses 3 to cast a Staff of Domination. The staff resolves, and Roxy targets her Archdruid to untap with one of the staff's abilities. Armin uses this as a chance to respond, and he casts a bought-back Capsize to bounce back the Druid to Roxy's hand. Roxy then drops a Shaman of the Forgotten Ways, and passes to Armin. Armin plays a Windswept Heath and gets value.deck. He then plays a Dark Depths and gets some more value. He then replays a Strip Mine from the yard and does it all once more. He then taps some lands and the new beasts that came into play to help pay for a Convoked Court of Calling, but Pat stops it with a spellbook version of Negate. Armin then cracks the Windswept Heath for 1, finding a Dryad Arbor. He responds to the Tatyova trigger, and Armin casts a Noxious Revival for 2 life to put the court on top once more. He then resolves the Tatyova's trigger, gaining 1 life, drawing 1 card, and gaining a token as it enters. He's then able to recast the court again, where X is 8, and he goes to find a Craterhoof Behemoth, putting everyone out of their misery in 1 swing. Game review time. So I think Armin was probably in the lead since the get-go, with Pat close behind him. Armin's start was certainly explosive, and having Burgeoning on turn 1 is pretty much the dream. In a deck like Tatyova, pulling ahead early on and basically drawing into more lands is just more and more gas. Pat was able to get similar value using his Phantasmal Image early on to make a copy of Tatyova, who stuck around for I think the entire game. Typically, Pat is able to be more aggressive with his Flying Sphinxes going right over other people's blockers and smashing in for huge amounts of damage. Unfortunately in this game, he wasn't able to because the swing back from Armin would have been devastating. This is my first time ever seeing the Azorius colored Taigam, and it was interesting, albeit a bit underwhelming. Unfortunately, Andrew drew a ton of his lands and no action or draw spells that he could really manipulate Taigam with. He was able to draw into 2 ways to make his commander unblockable, which is one of the things that you want to do anyway. The other half of the equation that is Taigam is unfortunately drawing into spells that do something, and drawing into Swords to Plowshares, while very good as removal, unfortunately didn't forward his board state. I think Roxy also struggled unfortunately playing against 3 other blue players, and having Soul's Majesty countered, or countered in the sense of having all of her creatures bounce back to her hand, set her back super far considering she had to spend 2 turns investing 5 mana into it. She was very close to winning. Despite all this, she was very close to winning, and had Armin not been able to bounce the Archdruid back to her hand, she probably would have won. Please be sure to tune in every Monday and Thursday at 11 AM Eastern Standard Time for a guaranteed new video. You can also follow me on Twitter at MTGMudsta. You can find me on Facebook at facebook.com/mtgmudsta. And lastly, you can check me out when I stream at twitch.tv/mtgmudsta. This video is brought to you in support by my patrons. If you're looking for a way to help out the channel, please be sure to visit the link below. Thank you all for watching this video, and don't forget, friends are just opponents you haven't eliminated yet.